Welcome to my channel. This is What the Theory with Joel. I'm Joel, and today we're going to be talking about an ex-Nazi, Martin Heidegger. For those of you that know me, this book, Being in Time, is a book I've read 4 or 5 times, and I think I've only understood it half the time. It's really incredibly difficult, and I think it was a bit pretentious of me to try and read it because I thought it was supposed to be this big monumental piece. And it's really just about what does it mean to be and how time is important. And seeing as it sounds very pretentious, I thought it would be the perfect topic for this channel. So here we go. Being in Time was written in the early 1900s, written by Martin Heidegger. If you have Googled anything about him, obviously he was a member of the Nazi party. He wasn't an active conspirator or architect. He was a philosopher who believed that Germany had lost its greatness and eventually was pulled into I think with World War I and all of that, felt that there was supposed to be a return to the fatherland. And I think for a long time, a lot of his sort of proponents, a lot of people who, fell in line with his philosophy seemed to think that, well, maybe he's just an absent-minded professor that went along to get along. But he seemed to really think a lot of the things the National Socialist Party were trying to bring back were good. So it's a bit problematic. So if you feel like it's something that ruins this discussion, it's probably best to stop here. But for me, I think there's still some insight to be garnered from this work, which came before that time, and I don't think is wholly soiled by that attribution. So, Being in Time. If you think about what it means to be, it sounds like a silly question. And most questions in philosophy are just like questions a kid would ask. Something like, why can't I see Napoleon? It's like, well, Napoleon is dead, you can't. It's like, what do you mean can't? Can't you just pull his molecules back together again? Say, no, well, his molecules have been spread and bringing him together won't make that happen. It's like, is it can't as in physically can't happen, or is it can't like I can't have ice cream before school? Like that kind of questioning, that annoying kid is what philosophy is. And most level-headed parents will just tell you to shut up and go and climb up a tree. Those people who continue asking that question and begin becoming annoying are, well, people who go into philosophy. And in Being in Time, the question that Heidegger raised was something that most people had taken for granted for a long time, which was that consciousness is a thing separate from reality. Separate from nature. The world exists as a fact out there, and though people like Immanuel Kant, David Hume were all arguing that all we can know of the world is what we perceive. We cannot go beyond our own perception. And the world is sort of my idea, as Schopenhauer said, that you only see things from your perspective and you can never get beyond that. But to prevent you being a solipsist, everyone sees some version of something. There's something out there causing these sensations that is separate from who we are as individuals. Well and good. Now, the fundamental thing that Heidegger asks in Being in Time is, what does it mean to be? And the response that you might get from, say, Descartes, which is, I think, therefore I am, doesn't cut it. Because he says the I that says I think is not the I that says I am, which is something that Lacan also said, which we shall explore in this channel later. But what he means is you are before you think. You have to first be in order to think. So what does it mean to be? And in trying to penetrate that question, you can't use the same language as you always use, because language is quoted in the subject-object dichotomy, where you are a subject experiencing the world. So you speak about the world in an object form and you are a subject. Essentially, you also objectify other people and then see yourself as an object when you're thinking. When you sort of, if you've ever been walking, there was this thing I used to do as a kid, especially I put my earphones on and I'd just listen to music and pretend like I'm in the band. I'm drumming and doing all this kind of stuff. I'm in my own world. And then someone would see me or someone would look at me. And in that moment, I saw myself as they saw me. I became an object in their world. And I could subjectively understand how they would be judging me. And he talks, you'd think existentially, that feeling of you are now an object in someone else's world, you realize that you have a rich inner being. You have a rich inner world that has to be explored, but no one can fully know it. So the heart of existentialism is, how you are a unique, authentic, different individual. But Heidegger goes deeper and says something to the point of, what if everything, what is the meaning to just exist? What is the difference between something not existing and existing? But the only way to penetrate that is to start through a human being, to start through this enterprise called humanity. And he calls a human being a Dasein, which is being there. Now, being there is almost like a clearing in the woods, and a revealing, an unconcealment. That is what is true. Constantly in the world, like say if you're looking at a text, like you're looking at me right now, I'm probably on a screen that is maybe in your hand, and your hand is part of your visual experience. But when you're looking at me, and you better be looking at me, everything else is out of focus, but you're just looking at me. Now, his argument is that that is the experience of reality, that we conceal and unconceal things depending on what we're paying attention to. And our being, we bring being into the world with us. Wherever we go, we shine the light of consciousness, even though he doesn't like the word consciousness, into everywhere that we go. And that's what it means to be. For Heidegger, the question of if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, did it really fall? Say no, because there cannot be a tree and a forest. There cannot be a world without us. To say that the world might exist without us is a purely, even though it's a scientific argument you might make, it is something that can never be experienced. What point of view are you looking at the world then? You're trying to remove yourself from the perspective which all of us have to have. And even if you try to do that, you're imagining that perspective. There is no way to fully comprehend what that perspective might be. There is no way to penetrate and understand what being is without being in the world, which is all put together as being in the world. One of the quotes from Being in Time is this: why are there beings at all instead of nothing? That is the question. Presumably it's not an arbitrary question. Why are there beings at all instead of nothing? This is obviously the first of all questions. Of course it is not the first question in the chronological sense, and yet we are each touched once, maybe every now and then, by the concealed power of this question, without properly grasping what is happening to us. In great despair, for example, when all weight tends to dwindle away from things and the sense of things grow dark, the question looms. Now, another quote from this is, even in expecting, one leaps away from the possible and gets a footing in the real. It's for reality that what is expected is expected. By the very nature of expecting, the possible is drawn into the real, arising from it and returning to it. So here is speaking about, we bring things into reality, not only with the hands that we make, not only with our ideas, because numbers are just nothing but ideas. They are a postulation of relations. Those things are brought into reality. They are instantiated by us, by our expectation. And Dasein is a being that cares, and Dasein is a being that questions. We question our place. We question what it is that we want to do. We question what it means to be us. That is the dark question that he's talking about. And there are many ways in which we answer this. And his exploration through Being in Time is, how do you understand a being that asks questions, that cares what is around it? And the most plausible way is to think about it in order of time. Now, let me read another piece from Being in Time. When tradition becomes master, it does so in such a way that what it transmits is made so inaccessible, proximally and for the most part, that it rather becomes concealed. Tradition takes what has come down to us and delivers it over to self-evidence. It blocks our access to those primordial sources from which the categories and concepts handed down to us have been in part quite generally drawn. Indeed, it makes us forget that they have such an origin, and it makes us suppose that the necessity of going back to these sources is something which we do not need to even understand. Now, as a human being, you realize other human beings are having an experience. You have a language which is shared with other people. You can never have a private language. You exist in a certain time. You exist in a certain place. But your understanding of what is around you is almost given to you. You come from a tradition. You are considered, in my instance, well, I would be male. I am Ugandan. I am from Western Uganda. I have a certain job. There are certain things that create categories for me to exist in the world. I didn't choose those things. I just found them to be. And that's what he calls Throneness. We are thrown into the world. We sort of exist in the world with a history and things that give us a sense of establishment, a sense of meaning. So as we think about our past, times that we didn't exist, things that happened before us, we look at a world and see that it's been acted upon, things have been instantiated, there are concepts and ideas that we only find present with us. And when he looks at it, he says tradition becomes a master in such a way that it transmits in such a way that it is inaccessible, and proximally, for the most part, it remains concealed. Tradition takes what has come down to us and delivers it off as self-evidence. In this instance, he says that there are things which we take as common sense, especially when you're a child. You do it just because that's the way it's always been done, and you questioning it often can be troublesome. You can get into trouble. You can start to scratch at the nerves and the questions that the people around you, the adults, have that they don't really have answers for. If you go back to the thing I was saying about being like a little philosopher, when you ask many questions, you're starting to pull at a thread that is a little more tenuous than most people want to admit. Yesterday I was watching a video that said something. It was asking a question around, where does the wind come from? Now that's not a question many people ask. They just know that the wind is there and it's taken as a given fact. But if you ask yourself, where does it come from? Where does it go? You might start to then discover new things around you. You start to discover some old responses about where that wind might come from. And you might find some of those answers are inadequate and wrong. And this is where you go from thrownness to understanding your present instantiation in the world. Now, your present instantiation in the world, where there's tradition, where there are norms and there are ways of being, ways of navigating the world, he would call that fallenness. And that fallenness, he calls it fallenness because you are not necessarily living a life that you authentically chose. You are taking what was thrown with you into the world, and you are looking around you and seeing what everyone is doing and finding a way to fit in. Because no matter, you're both a questioning being, but you're a being that cares, that is concerned about itself, that is concerned about your life. And that concern mirrors the third element, which is your existentiality. You are aware that you're going to die, at least if you're of age. You know that there's a finite amount of time that you have on this planet, and your death is not somewhere just ahead of you, sometime in the future. It's with you at all times. It's with you now. It pervades every moment. If you stop and think about it, you are almost about to die. You eat because you want to prevent death. You try and work hard so that you have security, so that you are not in physical danger and closer to death. But inevitably, every day we are slowly dying. And that information is at the back of our minds. It's sublimated most of the time. And the times when we mostly wake up is when we have like a near-death experience. But Heidegger's argument is that the meaning of existence comes by the fact that it's going to end. That potentiality is there. Now, if you're thrown into the world and you have to exist with other beings, and you've got an end in mind, you have many potentialities. You have many things that you could become. You could choose to become a carpenter. You could choose to become a warrior. You could choose to waste your life on a philosophy podcast channel, just telling people things that they don't really care about. But those are all your choices. And every choice that you make, you're reducing another potential that you could have. And, there's this notion that, people can have it all. I've never fully understood that, because if you're to fully have some things, it comes at the price of the potential of something else. Now, his argument is that a being in time, one that cares about what it's supposed to be, has to have this anxiety. Anxiety is not anxiety is a mark of your understanding of freedom. Like Kierkegaard would say, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. It is the understanding that you actually have to make a choice, but you don't have the benefit of knowing how that thing will turn out. You have to take almost a step of faith, and that is what life is, continually taking that step. And his argument, as Heidegger, is that how do you remain authentic in light of that? How do you make that choice so that you're not just doing it because you were thrown in a certain situation, or because you're fallen to a certain degree, or because you think you're going to live forever and think that all potentials are open to you? How do you navigate the world that way? And some interesting concepts, you know, he definitely has around, let's say, when you put your hand to the world, when you put yourself to a task. Think of technology. With technology, for instance, when you put your hand to something, when you're working on something, like when I'm working on this laptop, when I'm at the peak of productivity, I don't see the laptop, I just see the work that I'm doing. It is, shall I say, ready to hand. It is just something that I'm using to accomplish my task. But when it breaks down, when it stops working, when I can't get it to load, for instance, at that point in time, I am instantly reminded that it is something separate from myself. And, you know, he talks about you can live your life in such a way that you're not aware of how you are utilizing language, how you're utilizing people, how you are utilizing even your own freedom to just roam through the world. You're using it to get to something as a means to an end. But when those things break down, those moments where life doesn't go as you expect it to be, you realize that it's not essentially you, that you've been sort of masquerading in an armor. You've been moving in, you know, couched in common sense. You've been couched in pragmatics. And when that thing shakes you, that's the true time where Dasein starts to ask themselves, what does it mean to be authentically myself? And you have those choices before you. So this book was really powerful. It was really an existential book. These ideas seem quite obvious now, but if you think of the world before then, before the 1900s, whoever you are as a human being was something given to you. The idea that you could have a career, that you could choose who you would become, those were not things that the vast majority of humanity ever enjoyed. You were born in a certain family, you were born in a certain place, and you had to do your duty. And the thing it gave you was not a lot of anxiety. You know, if you failed as a peasant, you weren't expected to become a lord, you were a peasant. But over time now, you can carry with you the existential dread and anxiety of going, I've wasted my life. I've not done what I was supposed to do, or I've not been authentically who I'm supposed to be. And to me, understanding that that's a really new human experience, relatively speaking, from a chronological sense, means that there aren't ready answers for how we're supposed to deal with this. And even when I look at the world now, we are sort of moving from the age of where your identity was just given to you, where you just had to, how can I say, it was about duty. Then we're in the age of authenticity. But now with social media, we're moving to the age of prophelicity. But that will be a video for another day. So thank you for listening to me. Please, if you have the chance, read Being and Time. If you liked this video, like, subscribe, share, and join me next time for a deep dive into more esoteric nonsense. Goodbye.